Hello, everyone. This is DJ, and this is CG Talks, the podcast where CG guys talk about computer graphics. And today, our special guest is Mr. Gordon Neill, a 3D artist specialized in game dev and a host of a podcast called Digital Artcast, right? So I'm sure you all can be sure that today's episode will be full of crispy stories straight from Gordon's pouch. And
Crispy stories. That's a new one for me. Yeah, I'm sure they won't be that crispy, but I'll try and make them as sweet as I can. But yeah, thanks for having me on, DJ. It's an honor.
Yes, it's an honor for us, and I'm hoping that that your podcasting experience will prove of great value to this today's episode, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's why.
Yeah.
That's why I
was
going to
say. Yeah, on it. It's fine. I was just going to say, yeah, it's probably one of these weird things where I'm sitting on the other side of the mic this time, so that's why it's a bit weird for me. But yeah, it's very surreal being interviewed, not being the person who's interviewing somebody else. So yeah.
Yeah, but I'm hoping that also will be fun for you, and that's why I wanted to start with talking about Digital Artcast and how it affected your life, and because like both of us are running a podcast, and I know from my own experience that it's a tough game, and so far I've seen a lot of really cool and promising podcasts show up and disappear after a season or even a bunch of episodes. And it seems like you're in the business for the long run. It's been quite some time that you're running Digital Artcast, and I'm curious how it all began and what inspired you to start the podcasting journey, and what was like the whole evolutionary path to the present day, like the Digital Artcast as it is now.
It's funny actually looking back now, trying to remember stuff like that. It seems like so long ago, but then of course I've just started working for a company called GamerHub. Shout out to Gav, who are a Scottish-based games industry kind of website who are reporting on games industry stuff, and they just recently asked me to come on and be a technical writer for them and write about my game dev experience and the industry in general, which has been great because I've always wanted to give back. Outside of the podcast, I want to also do more blog type stuff, more writing. So I'm actually writing like an intro just now for the website to explain who I am and my journey. So I've actually had to put this all down on paper recently, like line by line, and recount the last 5 or 6 years. So it's probably great timing that you're interviewing me and talking about this stuff because it's now fresh in my head because I've had to look back and think. But I mean, I was so the whole kind of I'll try and give the whole history of it in a kind of condensed version. I worked over in the UK and Scotland specifically with the railway industry. So I got an apprenticeship when I was 18 out of school and worked with an engineering company that fixed telecommunications products in the railway infrastructure. And at the time, they were called Thales Telecom. They were actually, Thales was a French company, but worked over here. And then I think it was about 2009, 2010, Network Rail, who owned the infrastructure in the UK of the railway, bought the telecoms part back into the internal structure. And then I was working for them for a couple of years. And that was around the time I started to think about, what I wanted for the next 10 years of my life, because I was encroaching on 30. I was thinking about, where do I want to be in 10 years? And I, as an avid gamer all my life, from a very young age, 5 or 6 years old, Nintendo and Zelda, Mario, all that kind of stuff. And then, obviously growing up with Xbox, PlayStation, Halo. I've been in games all my days, and I always thought about that would be a great career, but I never knew where I could interject and make a name for myself. But watching at the time, the collector's editions came with behind the scenes DVDs that you could watch where they would talk about the making of process. And that's basically where I got my inspiration. And, I think it was specifically, there was 2 at the time. It was the God of War documentary. I think they were making God of War 3 at the time, and Halo 3. And those were 2 kind of peers into how they made the games, and I saw that there was an art side of it, and being kind of creative. And at that time, I was on YouTube. I was making game review videos, but I was also doing some art on the side because I just love comic books and I love drawing. So I kind of put two and two together, and thought that I could maybe be an artist in the games industry, because coding seemed kind of outside my realm at the time and not something that I was comfortable with because I didn't do great at school with maths and computers. Computers in general I was okay, but maths was definitely not my thing. So coding was kind of out the window at the time, and the only two pillars I saw at the time were coding and art. So I didn't know about like sound design and all the other things. So I thought, uh, let's do this. And I think again, the column I'm writing, I talked about one night specifically where I was on what they call on call at the time. So I could have got called out any time if there was a fault. And it was over New Year, Christmas, New Year, 2011 maybe, 2010, and I got called out on a fault that took me 16 to 18 hours to fix. And I came back and it was freezing. I was shaking. It was in the dead of night. I was covered in snow and water. And I almost passed out in my flat when I got back from the shift because I was so tired. And I thought, yeah, this is the time I need to leave. I can't do this anymore because Scotland, I don't know if you guys know, it's the weather up here ain't great. So it's it was a good decision, I think, at the time. And I phoned my parents and said, let's do it. And yeah, I applied for college that year, although it was late, and got into some basic courses. And then that just kind of evolved. I done a basic foundation in art. And then I done like a kind of diploma, as we call it, 2 years doing graphic design. And it wasn't until 2015 the story gets interesting because I was going to graduate my graphic design diploma. And I thought to myself, is this, why did I leave my job? I'm going to end up doing graphic design for some small corporation making logos. Is that really what I want to do? And I said, well, no, that isn't the reason I left. It's not the reason I want to stop. So the whole time I was obviously watching and trying to, learn more and more about the industry. Watching documentaries again when they came up. One of the big ones then at the time as well was the Double Fine documentary, where they documented the whole process of making Broken Age. And yeah, I got to 2015 and I said, no, I'm going to apply for university. I'm just going to go do it. So I did. And I didn't get into anywhere because apart from not having any great game design stuff or 3D skills at the time, there was also a huge stigma against mature students. And I was about 30 at this time, 31. And I actually went into something called clearing, where the places that are left come up and you can kind of dive onto those. So I did. And it was luckily I got into a place on a course in Paisley in Scotland. It's called the University of West of Scotland. And they got me into their 3D design course. I think specifically it's called 3D art with digital painting and VFX, something like that. But yeah, I done that. So on the research on looking at the course, because now I was like super fired in, I was like, right, time to go and get this job, time to get in this industry as much as I can. So I spoke to John at the time, who was the course leader, and I said, where do your guys go after graduation? How did have you got links with industry? And he then first introduced me to Axis Studios. It was Axis Animation at the time, who were based in Glasgow, and obviously at the time they had done some great stuff. And so I emailed one of their producers, who got me in touch with one of their talent people, Jill Wallace, and started having a conversation. Went to the first year of my course, started learning Autodesk Maya, which was hilarious because that was the first year they were teaching Maya. Before that, it was Lightwave. So it's like really old school 3D stuff, not even modern stuff, but yeah, Maya. And I think they actually started teaching Maya because Axis specifically were using it. So yeah, so learned all about that. And then I done my first year in university was a blur. I was just trying to learn as much as I could and meet people and make friends and again dive into the industry. But I used to watch Twitch specifically, and there was a woman on that called Anna Hollenrake. Shout out Anna, who's now I forget the name of the company. I think it's no Media Molecule. It's the guys who do Fall Guys, the game. She's there now as a concept artist. So, but yeah, she done a Twitch stream at the time, way back in the day, where she would paint and draw and talk to people. And I was obviously watching her stream, and she talked about industry workshops, which was a big thing in London. Daniel Matthews run it with a couple other people, and it was a networking event for artists from around the world. So of course I thought, let's get my ass down there and meet people. So I saved that whole year, worked a couple of part-time jobs and saved all my uni money and planned to go down to London. And that was the first time I'd probably left the country in about 10 years or left Scotland. And then yeah, I went down there, met a bunch of people. But then before going, I thought, I'll want to try and maybe reach out to some people and get a few familiar faces. So when I go down there, I've got some friends. And at the time, I also was friends with Suzanne Helmig. And Suzanne was a concept artist out of the Netherlands, but I knew her partner also was, doing some great stuff. At the time, Suzanne just never really wanted to come on the podcast, but she said, Titus might be up for it. So I interviewed Titus Lunter. He was my first ever episode. And the idea was that I would meet Titus, I would talk with him, and just get some general information on being a concept artist, because at that time I still wanted to do concept work. But also ask about the event and just about the scene in Europe in general. And I thought, rather than just interview him and keep it to myself, I'll put it on YouTube, because I've used YouTube before. I've been using it for years. And whatever I learn would be great for other people to learn. So that was the whole kind of origin story. I think I nailed that in under 10 minutes, so I think that was not too bad. But yeah, that was where it started. And when I went down there and met people, it was incredible. I met some legends at the time, like Marek Maciej and Marcin Kliski from CD Projekt Red, and Matt Systemica. Loads of people that are probably your side of the world as well. That there's Darek Zabrowski. Like, there was so many people at the time I was meeting, and we always talked about this recently, just how dense Poland is with talent. It's absolutely crazy how many amazing artists have come out of that small country. But so yeah, that first year was crazy, especially the stuff they were showing off. I think especially CD Projekt guys were all talking about Witcher 3 at the time, because they just finished that. So that was the huge thing they were all talking about. And yeah, a couple of really great talks. And that was my first dive into meeting people. And then a lot of the people that I met there, like Marcin Kliski, like Marek Maciej, they were all some of the first episodes that I had. Boku Eriksson, like all these guys. Yeah, that was the first kind of season of the podcast. So yeah.
Yeah, so it seemed like the podcast was kind of like a vehicle for you to really get into the industry, so to speak, right? So I wanted to ask how it impacted your professional work, and it seems like from what you're saying, like from the very origins, it was like entwined with all your other activities on getting a job and getting to know people and collaborate, right?
I mean, it's such a huge networking tool. I think it has been the last couple of years, where even when I went down to industry workshops at the time, I'd started a conversation with Jill Wallace from Axis at the time, but hadn't actually met her in person. And lo and behold, I went down to the IW, and her and John Beeston at the time, shout out to John, were sitting at a table, and I was talking away to them, and she just clicked. She was like, "Oh, you're Gordon." Yeah. So it was funny enough, because the podcast, my keenness for the industry mixed with going to these events was what basically got me that internship at Axis in 2017. And I was the first person in, I think, years from UWS who'd actually went up and had an internship with them. So that was a crazy experience as well, because when I was there, they were working on Destiny 2, League of Legends, some Warhammer stuff. So I mean, there was a bunch of things going on, TV shows that we're working on, and I got to see all that inner working. So it was just another great vehicle to motivate me to interview more people, and then of course the people I met at Access as well were people I had on the show. So yeah, it was a whole thing of like, the podcast just propelled me into people's, it made me stand in front of people. It made me, right in front of the people who mattered. And when I went to LA in 2019 for Lightbox, I already knew guys from the industry in America for the podcast, one because they were fans, and two because I'd probably interviewed them. So I was going to these big events, and people were like, "Oh, it's Gordon," and "Oh, God," like, professionally, my stuff isn't at anybody's caliber that the work at what it is now, but like at the same time, I'm so well known just because of the podcast. So it propels me into conversations and meetings with people that I just probably wouldn't have access to, and it's been great. I mean, the fondest memory I have in the last couple of years is the fact that when I went to Trojan Horses Unicorn THU in 2018 after I graduated, Raphael Grazzetti was giving a talk there, and I was a big fan of Raf's work before that, and knew he was working at Sony Santa Monica on God of War. And after his talk, I walked up to him and I said, big fan of your work, Raf. I love what you're doing. And he was like, "Oh, thanks." And and it wasn't until later that night I kind of offered to buy him a beer, and we got chatting more. And then I went to his. He was like, "Oh, I'm giving a demonstration tomorrow. Do you want to pop by?" And I was like, "Yeah." And sat in front, and then we talked some more. And then through that, he was like, hit me up on Instagram, I'll get back to the US, we can chat a bit more. And he realized that I had the podcast, right? Like, he knew I was already interviewing people, I was speaking to big names. Like, I'm one of the few people I think in the world that's interviewed Scott Robertson, right? Which is a huge honor. And because I was kind of clear and concise and could talk and hold a conversation, he was like, "Yo, I'm doing these talks and doing these demonstrations, these classes. I'm going to need somebody to mediate and talk with the audience and help me." So Raf basically offered me work to work with him on his sculpture classes, which are still up, and I also helped edit the videos and put them up as well. And yeah, like, I done all that again before I went to LA. So by the time I got to meet Raf, we were good friends, and Raf still considers me a good friend. I still consider him a good friend, and that relationship was really born out of the podcast. And it's crazy to think, because again, professionally, with the work I was doing in 3D, I wasn't breaking down any barriers or exposing any huge bits of work, but the podcast was what impressed him, and he could see the passion I had for the industry. So it's definitely been explosive the last couple of years, just the doors that's opened for me.
Yeah, so it seems like it really paid off, like to jump into that train, right?
Yep.
The podcasting train, and get your foot in the door. And
Yep.
and I wanted to ask, like, was there any like hard lessons that you learned, like maybe some failures when doing the podcast, or maybe some funny stories, like something that you can
Yeah.
recall?
I mean, there's a few, but they're more kind of technical aspects where before I was using Zencaster, as you now know, I was using things the same as you guys. So I was using Skype, I was recording my screen, I was recording conversations that way. And I remember one conversation I had with Justin Fields at the time that I've never been able to recapture, and I recorded the whole thing and realized that I wasn't recording the audio. So we had like an hour and a half talk, and Justin kind of was doing these great things. We were talking about these great subject matters and stuff, and then I watched the video back and I was like, "Oh shit!" Like, I've totally not captured the audio. Oh my god, what am I gonna do? So it was definitely a curva moment, but yeah, like, it was it was one of these things where I definitely thought, oh, what am I going to do? And Justin was like, "Ah, oh, shit, man, like, never mind." But yeah, that was one of the hardest things, was like, because Justin as well, Justin Fields is such a high profile artist. I thought, what a great opportunity to talk to him. So yeah, that was definitely like a low blow at the time. But and then again, I think just trying to pick the right people. I mean, I've had sometimes interviews with people where I felt it's not gone well, or it's too stale, or there's not been any kind of chemistry when we've been talking. I mean, you guys have your prep, obviously, but I've almost never went into a podcast with any prep. Like, I think the great thing I find about my conversations is because they're so natural. That's why people can engage in them. And, I'd like to have those moments, where, like, if I've not heavily researched something and they talk about a bit of their past that's really interesting, I'm like, I never realized. And then can we talk more about that? And it just naturally evolves. Because I've never had that issue about, talking to people, or, holding a conversation. It's just always came naturally to me. I can talk to people for hours and hours. It's never been an issue. So yeah, it's a thing where, like, I'm just I'm trying to continue on and make these conversations as natural as possible. But the only thing I've ever noticed is stuff where people are either, you have to push back a lot. So you have to. I think the overall thing I've learned the last couple of years, it's been a hard lesson, is just being patient, because people will, of course, naturally just get pushed back, or they have a meeting, or that day falls through and they have to do something. So sometimes I've waited 6 to 8 months for people to free up, and yeah, it's just a case of just waiting. So those would be a couple, I would say, that are hard lessons. But yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder about your relationship with your audience. Like,
Mhm.
is it like, which one is more like rewarding for you? Like getting some feedback from the audience that maybe
Mhm.
finds your content inspiring, or just the sheer possibility of talking to people that you are interested in, and then you just share that value that you get from the podcast to the audience, and that's just the most rewarding part of it. or do you have some genuine feedback that the podcast is really like impacting people that listen to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of everything, right? I mean, like I said, I've got to interview some crazy big names. I mean, Raf is still not came on the podcast, and I hate him for that. But he's knee deep in God of War 2. I know he's busy, he can't get away. But um, like Scott Robertson was always somebody who I admired and idolized, and it was great to have him on. Maciej Kutiara, I mean, Maciej, right? I mean, Maciej's a huge name all the way
Yeah.
from Poland to the US now, and he's absolutely killing it across there.
Also doing a podcast, right? But recently he
Yeah,
stopped publishing for some time, but
Yeah, I mean, art
maybe
cafes. Yeah, I mean, when I was there, even at industry workshops, there was a couple of, Ash Thorpe was there doing a live podcast at the time as well. So, I mean, I already knew how big it could have been and how big they'd already made it. So, yeah, but then it was funny when I was interviewing somebody, they were like, Gordon, you're like one of like 3 people in the world who's doing a regular podcast that allows us as artists to have a vehicle to talk about our work. And they were like, if you went away tomorrow, there'd be 2. So it's like, there's only so many people doing it because it's such a niche. And I never realized the relevant or importance of what I do. And it's never lost on me. I'm humbled every day. You talk about like people who find it rewarding. I've had emails from people, a guy in Australia who reached out, I think it was either the start of this year or last year, where he talked about how he was turning 30 and he made a decision to do what I'd done and leave his job as an engineer and go into art. And that was like, I was in a flood of tears. I was like, I can't believe it. It's like crazy. I've influenced somebody's life on the other side of the planet. And, I regularly get, and, like you email me obviously, but then I've had other people who email me who are like, I've listened to your podcast for years. I just want to say thank you. And, it's so rewarding to just be able to help other people, because it's really, I think, what makes us great as a race on this planet is the ability to connect and help others. I think that's really what we should be focusing on going forward in this whole, post-pandemic world. I think there's too much individualism in people, and I think we need to remember about communities and our own inherent towns and cities and countries, and come together. But yeah, I think it's a mix, getting to interview absolute legends in the industry while at the same time engaging with my audience and helping them in their life. And that's probably why I started the whole thinking out loud segment, because it was just a vehicle for me to just splurge my ideas onto the screen and talk about, what I was thinking about. I mean, recently, you guys will know if you check my channel out, and you probably know as well, I've done those videos where I was ready to hang up my hat and take a break and walk away from the podcasting world and think about the next step and what I was going to do. But that was the most unnatural thing I think I've ever done in my life. Where as soon as I talk about it in my video when I came back about how it just felt so unnatural, because I felt like I wasn't just abandoning what I loved, I was also abandoning the people who loved it. And it was an instant thing where I put the video up and I walked downstairs and I went, what am I doing? Like, the podcast has been such a huge part of my life for the last couple of years. I'd be stupid to give it up and or even take a break, because I know, at the time I thought it was great because it was giving me a chance to breathe and work, focus on the new job. But at the same time, I was like, it's such a huge part of who I am. I just can't abandon it. So almost, I think within a week, I came back and said I wasn't leaving. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster. And I think one of the faults, again, you talk about hard lessons, is that I think in social media, I've always tried to wear my heart on my sleeve and be very open and honest with my audience and people on my social medias about every single thing I'm thinking or feeling. And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because some companies would look at it as you're kind of unstable, or you're having these episodes where you're being depressed, or your mental health's no great, which I think is stupid. If a company really looks at stuff like that and thinks you're not a great artist, it's so ridiculous, because everybody goes through shit in their life. But then at the same time, I know people on my social medias who have praised me for being so open, because it's helped them as well to realize that, even somebody like Gordon can have a bad day, or can question what he's doing. It's not just, because there's so, I mean, we talked about this with Maciej, where there's so many people who have this high caliber existence on the industry, and people think that they never get tired, they never get fed up, they never have things where they get up one day and they don't want to do art. Like, everybody goes through that. You're just human. So yeah, I'm just glad that I have a vehicle that helps as well as informs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if even just a break from the podcasting is like a totally different thing than just like hanging it on a shelf and quitting, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I guess the reaction from the audience was obvious, right? That everyone
Yeah.
just waited for you to get back, and luckily you can just like turn it into a pre-planned action, just to boost the interest.
Yeah. A lot of people thought it was clickbait at one point. They were like, he's came back in a week, so he's obviously just been, messing with us. But I genuinely was like, thinking about like, this is probably a good decision. And then as soon as I made that, I was like, no, it's not. So, but then it was fun as well because there was so many people in the comment section of that goodbye video who were like so supportive and like, yeah, dude, like, take your time, come back when you're ready. Like, we'll still be here. And it was just, I think it was just reaffirming. I think those comments also made it hard to walk away because when I saw so many people being supportive, I was kind of like, I don't want to abandon those people. So, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you if you also like listen to other podcasts, like maybe in the niche, in the art niche, or maybe some other topic podcasts, like, and do you have some favorite ones? Maybe some that disappeared and you miss them, or some that are still going on.
I mean, there's been a few. I mean, it depends on because even within the podcast space now, it used to be that there was a lot of art podcasts, but now there's like even you guys, like there's specifically CG or 3D ones. There's guys who do more concept stuff or painting. A lot of channels have podcasts, but are part of the whole YouTube experience. So there's people who have like a YouTube channel where the podcast is one thing they do, but they also do uploads and they do painting videos. And I mean, Draftsman is a great one with Stan Prokopenko. I mean, I know he has been doing that for a while now, and I really love his talks that he does with those. I mean, Art Cafe, obviously, with Miche, I've listened to him for many, many years. So Miche's been doing that really well for so long. Ash Thorpe's podcasts have always been informative and great. And the last couple of years, I've seen that he's tried to expand beyond just artists and talk to other people in different industries, scientists, world leaders, and well, maybe not world leaders, but people who in the world who are leading the field and what they do in science or technology. And yeah, there was a really good podcast as well that used to be. It was Art of Podcast or I forget the name the podcast specifically, but there was one that came and gone that was really great. The Student Art Podcast with Ross Baxter, who's also Scottish. He does episodes regularly. I know he's kind of been on and off, taking breaks and coming back due to things that have been going on in his life. But I've always enjoyed his content as well. I thought it was great. Somebody else from Scotland was doing it. There's a whole slew of people. I mean, way back in the day when I first started listening to podcasts, it wasn't even like the big names. It was like people from like, well, I say big names, but people from like Disney who done podcasts who weren't as well known, but were doing podcasts as well. There was one, I mean, mine's is Digital Artcast, but there was a kind of Artcast podcast that wasn't me. It was someone else was doing it, and I think he was a visual development artist from Disney. And he done one. Again, it's hard to remember the names, but yeah, there's a few. There's definitely. I'd say even in the space right now, there's more than there was definitely 5 years ago. And I can only see that expanding. But like you said, I think the consistency is always the hard part because there's people who come and go and make the podcast, but then maybe within a year, it kind of falls off and they don't follow through, or they get bored after so long and then it cuts, and or there's big gaps between content. So I think I've been uploading at least once a month for the last 5 years without fail, and especially during the initial lockdown in 2020. We were putting up like 3 to 4 episodes a month. So yeah, I've definitely tried to put as much content out as I can.
Yeah. So once you decided to stick to the podcasting, do you have like some kind of a vision, like a dream episode that you would like to record someday? Like you had already a long list of big names and the guys that you consider heroes, but maybe there's something that seems like out of this planet, and yet you think that might be that thing, that dream episode.
There's a laundry list. I mean, I can say this now because the episode will be getting premiered or up for preview just now. Actually, I've literally just today actually uploaded it. So Carla Ortiz, I just interviewed her, and her episode's going up Christmas Day as the Christmas special. So that was a dream as well because I've loved Carla's work for a long, long time. I got to interview guys like Danny O'Dwyer from NoClip. So like that was incredible as well, because I've been a fan of Danny's work for a long time with the NoClip documentaries. Um, Scott Robertson was definitely like a highlight, and Mache and Glauco Longi and a lot of these guys from America. I would still love to interview Ian McCaig and Ian McHugh, like both two great, amazing Scottish relevant artists that are huge within the world of concept design. So I mean, them as well would be great. I know we've done a Black Lives Matter panel back last year during the kind of height of the riots and the disturbance in the US. And that was a great experience to have those black artists on the podcast and talking about their issues and all those things. What I would love to do would be a Women in Games podcast. That again is a bit tricky because typically women who work in the game industry don't really want to talk extensively about things they go through, both the good and the bad, because of the way the industry is. You could either be outing yourself or talking about other people you're not supposed to, and then of course it can impact your future career. So if I could get a couple of women who would really want to nail down that and sit down and do that, that would be another dream thing to do, because I think there's definitely not enough representation in the podcast space for female artists. That's one of the things I've really challenged myself to do the last couple of years, was talk about female empowered artists and women within games. We had recently Marina Alexandra, who's was at Splash Damage, has now moved to Rocksteady. We also had Mary Sue Challoner, who is at Ubisoft now, who was Ubisoft Reflections, which is also interesting with her position, because within Ubisoft Reflections in Newcastle, she was talking about how their prop team is all women. So it was a crazy thing as well, because the whole thing is like there's so many, not even just women, right? Like other minorities and people from other countries. Like it would just be great to get more people on. And I think as well, I'd love to do a Scottish panel where it was more live and I was sitting with people and interviewing them in person. I think that's more the natural evolution I want to do later down the line, now that I have a full paid job where I've got money, a bit of disposable income. So I'd want to invest some decent camera gear and maybe go like, place to place or country to country and sit down with people and interview them face to face rather than just over the internet like I've done before. I think that would be a great evolution beyond what I've already done with the podcast so far. So yeah.
So it seems like your big dream would be like making even more impact on people's lives, right? Or in the industry in general.
Yeah, making documentaries similar to the ones I watched coming up. Like I want to make my own many movies about people or artists, or maybe one specific topic like mental health and art and how it affects us all and how we deal with it within the industry. So yeah, stuff like that would be great to deal on a personal level with people.
Yeah. So I guess all is in the hands of the fate, or like lies ahead. So
yeah,
glad you stick to the
exciting times ahead. So yeah
to keeping Digital Artcast alive. So
yes,